Greetings and welcome to the introduction to astronomy. In this week's exploration of the solar system, we are going to talk about the Venera 13 through 16 craft and how they explored the solar system. So let's get started. And these craft were launched, and we can see the dates here. They were launched. The Venera 13 and 14 craft were launched in October and November of 1981. And the Venera 15 and 16 craft were launched a couple of years later in June of 1983. Now these are really the last of the Venera spacecraft, which were sent by the Soviet Union to explore the planet Venus, and were actually the only craft. Some of them were the only craft that ever landed on the surface and sent back images directly. So let's look at Venera 13 and 14 because they're kind of a pair. They were landers like some of the earlier ones, and they were designed to survive about 30 minutes on the surface of the planet. And the idea with these was to be able to study the atmosphere, and they'd study the atmosphere as they journeyed through the atmosphere, because obviously you have to go through the atmosphere to get down to the surface of the planet. And then to study the surface. And here we see an image from Venera 14. We can see part of the craft in the foreground here, and we can see some of the rocky material. Now, the rocks tended to be very volcanic material, so basalts, much like the rocks on our moon, and especially those on the Maria, the lava plains on the moon. And Venus seems to be quite similar to that. Now, one interesting thing is that we did have the first recording of sound here on another planet, not specifically designed for that, but some of the equipment was able to record sound. So we actually recorded sound from the surface of another planet. And that was the first time that this had ever occurred. Now, a few years later, we had the Venera 15 and 16 craft. Now, these were orbiters, so they were orbiting orbiting the planet, and the goal was to map the surface. Now, what you have to remember with Venus is constantly shrouded in clouds, so you can never see the surface directly. So anything there has to use other wavelengths of light. You can't use ordinary visible light because the clouds completely cover the planet and you cannot see the surface at all. So they were mapping it with radar. Now we've done other radar missions, and we'll look at others in the future as well. But there are ways to be able to penetrate through the clouds and to be able to get a complete map of the surface. In this case, these craft were able to map some of the northern regions, starting with the northern pole and working downward toward the equator, but not quite getting there. So they mapped certain parts of it, but did not map the entire planet. However, it gave us then an overview of what the planet looked like, and not directly, not with images like we see with the Venera 14 image here, but really being able to still see the entire planet. And future missions have also mapped that to give us a complete image of the surface of Venus, even though we have never been able to see through the clouds. And our only direct visible images are from some of those Venera spacecraft that actually penetrated the clouds and gave us those images. So let's go ahead and finish up here with our summary. And what we've looked at today is that Venera 13 and 14 were the lander missions that were going to explore the surface and the atmosphere of Venus. Venera 15 and 16, on the other hand, were orbiters, and those were going to map the surface using radar from orbit. And these were the final sets of craft in the Venera program that were used and that were launched by the Soviet Union in the 1970s and 1980s primarily. So that concludes this video on exploration of the solar system, talking about the Venera 13 through 16 spacecraft. We'll be back again next week for another exploration of the solar system. So until then, have a great day, everyone, and I will see you in class.